So the 2018 webinars are brought to you by the Ant Pests and Urban IPM Extension Communities of Practice and by the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, the University of Georgia Extension, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and Clemson Cooperative Extension. So today we have Dr. Nancy Hinkle. She is Georgia's medical veterinary entomologist. She studies insects and their multi-legged relatives that threaten human and animal health. Her research involves pets, poultry, livestock, and other animals, as well as bloodsuckers that attack them, including fleas, ticks, lice, mites, mosquitoes, biting flies, and so on. Her project on invisible bugs, illusory parasitosis, is nationally recognized as a clearinghouse for people throughout the country, and she has published several papers on the condition. Before joining the University of Georgia faculty 17 years ago, Dr. Hinkle taught at the University of California for 9 years. She authored the flea section of the latest Mouse's Handbook of Pest Control and the Fleas chapter for the World Health Organization's Public Health Significance of Urban Pests. She contributes articles for PMP and other industry publications. Her chapters have been published in Encyclopedia of Pest Management, the Encyclopedia of Insects, the textbook Medical and Veterinary Entomology, and other books that you probably won't find in your local library. So thank you so much, Dr. Nancy Hinkle, for being here today, and we look forward to your talk about fleas.
Thank you, Evan. It's a delight to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Well, it's that time of year. Warm weather's bringing out the insects, and it won't be long before your offices start receiving calls about fleas. So today we're going to talk about what you might want to know about fleas as the season changes on us here. Now, worldwide, there are a lot of different types of fleas, over 2,000 species and subspecies. As you can see, the vast majority of them are found on mammals, but there are a few on birds. But they're only found on warm-blooded creatures, mammals and birds. They're found worldwide on every continent. But today we're going to make it easy. We're just going to talk about one species, the cat flea. Scientific name, Tenniscephalides felis. I think anybody who's had an animal or been around animals probably is familiar with cat fleas. Now, even though we're going to be talking about cat fleas, this is the most common flea that's found on cats and dogs, at least here in North America. In Europe, the dog flea is not uncommon. But for some reason, we don't really have dog fleas here in North America. So if you find a flea on a dog, 95% chance it's going to be a dog flea. Excuse me, a cat flea on the dog. Why are we concerned about fleas? Probably mainly because of what they do to our pets. Flea allergy dermatitis. This is a severe allergic reaction to the secretions in the salivary material. And for some reason, it causes dogs, particularly dogs, to be extremely irritated, severe itching. You may have seen animals suffering from this condition. An animal suffering from flea allergy dermatitis is just miserable. They spend all their time scratching, licking, trying to alleviate the irritation. I think any of us who've ever had chiggers can probably appreciate what the poor animal's going through. And you just don't want to see an animal suffering like this. With all the licking and scratching, eventually they abrade the skin sufficiently that they typically develop a secondary infection. Then they've got to go to the vet, they've got to get antibiotics, they've got to be treated for the secondary infection. Fortunately, steroids can help control the symptoms of flea allergy dermatitis, but they don't treat the cause. The only way to prevent an animal from suffering from flea allergy dermatitis is to prevent the animal from being bitten by fleas. And unfortunately, it only takes 1 or 2 flea bites to produce this entire cascade of flea allergy dermatitis. So it's critical in these households where these animals are severely allergic to fleas to be very conscientious about controlling fleas. Well, let's talk a little bit about fleas and what they do. All fleas are bloodsuckers, and only bloodsuckers. Without something to feed on to get blood, they will die. They can't even drink water. So to get both their nutrition and their moisture, they have to have a blood meal. Over on the left, we've got a light microscope shot showing a bunch of fleas feeding on skin. And then over on the right, you can see a scanning electron micrograph showing a flea up close and personal. It's got its mouth part stuck down in the skin, the head's right up against the skin there, and then as you can see, the rear end sticking up in the air. Now, notice all the spines on that animal. Have you ever tried to extract a cocklebur from the coat of a dog or a cat? Yeah, they stick in there pretty well. Same thing with fleas. They've got all these backward projecting spines that allow them to maintain their position in the coat of the animal very well. So removing a flea from the coat of an animal can be very challenging. Here's more scanning electron micrographs showing fleas. The one on the left is the male, the one on the right is the female. Doesn't really matter, but if you're curious, if you'll notice, the male has a indentation in his forehead there, a furrowed brow. The female, on the other hand, has a smooth brow. She's not worried. She doesn't have wrinkles. But just again, look at all the spines, all the projections from their bodies. This shows again how well designed they are to stay in the coat of the animal. I want to run through the life cycle of the pest. I think everybody realizes that the more you know about the enemy, the more effective you can be in treating for them. And I'm going to mention several things later on that pertain to different stages in the life cycle of the flea. So, like most living things, they are sexual creatures, so they've got to mate. And so here we've got the male and female in the mating position. The male is underneath, he's the little guy there. The female is on top. He inseminates her. She then matures eggs, lays eggs. Now, once a cat flea finds a host, it's going to stay on that host for the rest of its life. And if you think about it, it makes sense because a cat flea has to have a blood meal at least once an hour. They need the nutrients from the blood meal for the females to produce eggs, for the males and the females to have energy, and just for them to grow. So the female is on the host, she's sucking blood, she matures an egg, she deposits the egg, all while she's still on the host. The egg is not sticky, so even though it's laid on the host, it doesn't stay in the coat of the animal. It falls off and collects in the host environment. So this is a clue right here. Wherever the animal is spending the most time, that's where the flea eggs and eventually the hatching flea larvae are going to be concentrated. So think about this cat. What's the first thing this cat's going to do when she wakes up from her nap? Yep, she's going to stand up, she's going to scratch a couple of times. So if there were any flea eggs laid in her coat while she was napping, all of those flea eggs are going to sift through the coat and fall into the couch below. So we know that there's probably going to be a good concentration of flea eggs and then eventually flea larvae in a day or two when they start hatching, concentrated right around that area. So again, this tells us something about how to control. If you're going to use physical control, if you're going to use just vacuuming up flea eggs before they hatch, knowing where the animal's spending its time is crucial because that's where you want to concentrate your efforts, sucking up as many of those flea eggs as possible before they hatch. So this is the material that's going to collect underneath that cat's napping area. The pearly white objects there are the flea eggs. That's what flea eggs look like. And then notice that dark material around them. The dark material is fecal material from the adult fleas. Yes, if a flea takes in blood, eventually it comes out the other end as feces, so it's just partially digested blood. Remember again, the flea only feeds on blood, so the only thing it has to digest is blood. And this material then is partially digested host blood. Now it turns out that this is beneficial because it turns out that flea larvae prefer to feed on partially digested host blood, that is, adult flea feces. Yes, they're eating the poop from their adults, from their parents. So when the little larvae hatch out of these eggs, they crawl around, they graze, and they feed upon this material here. And apparently it's high in nutrients that are just ideal for flea larvae. The flea eggs are not very large, so even if you've got a bunch of them, you're going to be hard pressed to find them. They're less than a ½ millimeter long, and they do again occur in clusters. Then out of each one of these little flea eggs will hatch a flea larva. So here's a newly hatched flea larva up at the top of the slide, and then there's an empty eggshell down below that it came from. course, they're very small when they first hatch because they had to fit inside that flea eggshell. And as I said, they start grazing, they eat, they feed, they grow. And this is what a flea larva looks like. Not anything very distinctive. They don't have legs, they don't have eyes, they don't have ears, they don't even really have a head. The head, by the way, is that more pointed end over on the left, whereas the blunt end that you see over on the right, that's the rear end. Now notice in the inside of that flea larva, there's dark material. That's what it has ingested. That's the food. And as we said just a minute ago, it feeds primarily on adult flea feces. So that's just adult flea feces. That's why it's dark and you can see it through the translucent body of the flea larva. Flea larvae live just to eat and grow. So they're crawling around in the carpet, eating, growing, getting bigger, going through their larval stages and getting as big as they're going to get, which, by the way, is only about ½ centimeter long. Here's a flea larva over on the left in the scanning electron microscope shot, showing what they look like. Again, the head is poorly defined. There's no eyes, no ears, no legs. The body segmentation with a few little hairs stuck on it, that's about all you can say about flea larvae. Very hard to identify. Sanitation, of course, is a crucial aspect of any pest management program, and no more so than here with fleas. If you can vacuum up those eggs before they hatch, you can certainly cut down on the numbers of fleas that are available. So all of the stages can be vacuumed up, removed from the environment, if you know where to vacuum. And to emphasize this point, here's a section of carpet that we've cut in half. So you can see the carpet backing down at the bottom, and then you've got the carpet fibers extending up to the top of the slide. Never really looked at carpet from this perspective, have you? No reason to. If you look right there in the middle, right above the T in the base of the carpet fiber, you'll see a little squiggly creature. That's a flea larva. So the flea larva is crawling around down there. And again, it's just grazing on the material that collects at the base of the carpet. If you think about it, all the flea fecal material eventually is going to sift down through that material and land on the base of the carpet. So that's where most of the nutrients are going to be collected, and that's a good place for little flea larvae to congregate and graze. That's where they're going to get their food. Think about this, though, in terms of control. There's no insecticide that we apply that saturates the carpet. We don't want to saturate the carpet because it'll rot the jute backing there and ruin our carpet. So we really don't have a way to get insecticide down to flea larvae. And this is a real challenge for us. We'll talk more about this and why it is such a problem for controlling fleas later on, but just think about it from the perspective of the flea larva. It's like if you were reduced to the size of a flea larva and you were crawling around down at the base of the carpet, these big carpet fibers would be sticking up above you like trees looming up above you. All right, so the egg is hatched into the larvae have crawled around, eaten, they've gotten as big as they're going to get. Now the next stage, of course, is the pupal stage. Like caterpillars, flea larvae also secrete silk and they spin cocoons. Now their cocoons, the silk that they produce, is sticky, so anything in the environment will stick to the cocoon and effectively camouflage it quite well. As you can see, this cocoon was made in sand, so it's got a lot of sand grains adhering to the nice sticky silk. If we had a flea larva that had been crawling around in the carpet and made its cocoon in the carpet fibers, it would be attaching all sorts of loose carpet fibers. So if you've got a blue carpet, the cocoon would end up looking blue. If you got a red carpet, it'd be red. So it's really well camouflaged. In other words, the cocoon is not going to look like a flea cocoon. It's going to look like just a little lint ball. If we take the cocoon immediately after it's been formed and we open it up, you can see the flea larva still coiled up inside there. If we give it a couple of days, the larva has pupated. Open up that cocoon on the left. Again, this shows a real close-up of a magnified flea cocoon. You can see the individual sand grains quite well there. And again, they're adhering to the sticky cocoon within which the flea larva has secreted itself and is going through its metamorphosis. So it's now gone from a flea larva to the pupal stage. Over on the right then you have the scanning electron micrograph of a flea pupa. The head's up at the top, the rear end's down at the bottom. Over on the left you can actually see the individual legs sticking out of the pupa, and that's what it looks like while it's still inside the cocoon. We peeled the cocoon away so we could get this photograph. Now if you wait a few more days, the pupa, of course, will convert into the adult. Here we've taken the flea cocoon, pinched it back, and you can see that inside it's lined with silk, like I told you it was, with the sand grains sticking to the outside of it. And inside you can see the adult flea. It has now completed its development. It is now an adult flea. You can see those legs with all the spikes sticking off of them, and that's the rear end of the abdomen that we're looking at there. The head and the thorax are tucked up under the silk that's still at the front of the body there. One point I'd make here that I make with all my students is that fleas emerge from the cocoon. They hatch from eggs. So hatching is like little baby chicks coming out of the egg, but when the adult emerges, we use the term emerge, not hatch. Adults don't hatch, only babies hatch. Oh, I wanted to make the point that this is the most variable stage in the entire life cycle of the flea. And this is probably what causes the most challenges for flea control, because the adult flea can remain within the cocoon without emerging for a long time. And I am deliberately vague there. We know they can stay inside the cocoon for weeks. We know they can stay inside the cocoon for months. We don't really know what the upper limit is. It may be a year. It may even be over a year. You probably have seen this phenomenon. If you know any real estate agents, they have seen this. They have an account. They have an apartment. They've been trying to rent it. A young couple comes to town, they want an apartment, so she takes them over to the apartment. She opens it up, she walks in, she's wearing white slacks, and within the first 3 or 4 steps into the apartment, her legs are covered in fleas up to the knees, and she comes running out of the apartment screaming and calls the pest control company and says, "Come do something about these fleas." Well, the pest control company comes over, they spray, close up the apartment, leave it for a few more days. She goes back to show it again, walks in, gets more fleas on her. She's pretty upset with the pest control company. They didn't do their job. Well, there's really not much you can do about fleas while they're in the cocoon. Typically, the cocoon is formed down at the base of the carpet where the larva was. It's pretty well insulated away from any insecticide applications we make. The flea larva has completed its conversion to the adult, so insect growth regulators are no longer effective against it. So that adult flea can pretty well sit inside that cocoon undisturbed, not using a lot of energy. They're at a very low level of energy use, so they can stay there, as I said, for weeks or months at least. Until something comes along to stimulate them to emerge from the cocoon, they will stay inside the cocoon. Now, typically, the sorts of things that stimulate them to come out of the cocoon are things that emulate a host. Things like carbon dioxide. All of us warm-blooded creatures breathe out carbon dioxide, so that signals to a flea that there's a potential host nearby. Other things include warmth. If a warm body passes by, somehow these fleas can detect that, even from inside the cocoon. And also apparently vibrations. So creatures walking on the floor, making the floor vibrate, they perceive that as the potential for a nearby host as well. But until these stimuli provoke the flea to come out of the cocoon, it's going to stay inside that cocoon, not using much energy, and just hanging out until there's a chance of a blood meal being nearby. Obviously, it doesn't want to come out, hop around, and waste all of its energy when there's no chance of getting food. So they just sit there until there's a chance for a blood meal. Again, that produces a severe challenge to pest control, trying to get rid of fleas that are hiding inside the cocoon. So then the adult flea emerges and starts the infestation all over again. Males and females get together, start the life cycle over. Just to summarize, the eggs hatch in usually 2 to 4 days. The larva can grow over a period of 2 to 4 weeks. This, of course, is dependent on temperature. If it's cold, it's going to take longer. In a nice warm summer here in the southeast, 2 weeks is probably sufficient. The pupal stage, notice there, I don't know how many months. We know that the adult flea can stay inside that cocoon for a long time. Once it emerges, it typically lives only a couple of weeks. Either it finds a host or it starves to death. Even if it finds a host, it's going to die probably because the host is going to groom it off. We've shown that one of the major mortality factors for an adult flea once it finds a host is the host. Hosts are very good at scratching and biting and removing fleas. Now, I just want to briefly mention some control. This is really not something that I should go into much because it's much better if each individual considers what is most significant to them, the types of products they want to use, and gets expert advice, either for treating the home from a pest control company or for treating the animal from a veterinarian. But just to summarize, as we know, there are main categories like the topical materials. There are several formulations of insecticides now that are meant to be applied directly to the host in very small volumes. These products are lipophilic. That means they dissolve in skin oils. So you put just a very small amount of the material on the neck of the animal, right against the skin, not on top of the fur, but against the skin. And then over the next 24 hours or so, that material will actually dissolve in the skin oils and gradually migrate around the entire body surface just through the skin oils. Now, that explains some of the cases where these products don't work very well, because there are people out there that insist on washing their dog every week. I'm not one of them, but people who do like to wash their dogs are going to end up with an animal that doesn't have a lot of skin oils, and so there's not going to be any material for the flea oils, for these oils then to dissolve into and distribute over the coat of the animal. In other words, when you apply that material to that spot on the neck, it's going to just sit there right there in that spot on the neck. It's not going to distribute over the entire body. So the lesson learned here is if you're going to be using these sorts of products, you can't wash your animal immediately before using these products. You need to allow a few days to allow the natural skin oils to reconstitute on the body of the animal. There are many of these formulations. You can get some from the veterinarian. There are several you can get over the counter. Of course, the type of active ingredient has an impact on how effectively these products work. Also be sure to read and follow label instructions. I'm sure you've heard that a few thousand times. But notice, for instance, on this over-the-counter product, look in the upper left-hand corner there. It says, important, intended for use on dogs, do not use on cats. And the reason is, if you look at the active ingredient there, it's permethrin. Permethrin is a felicide. It will actually kill cats. It's highly toxic to cats. Now, a few of you may not care for cats. Maybe you want to kill cats. But let me recommend, if you want to exterminate cats, just kill them. Kill them outright. Don't put them through this, because sometimes this material doesn't immediately kill the cat. So you end up with a cat that's vomiting from one end, spewing diarrhea from the other end, running around madly, spreading this material everywhere before it dies. And sometimes the animal doesn't die, but you end up with a cat with neural deficits. In other words, a cat that's not all there. Now, people who don't like cats would probably say you can say that about every cat, but you really don't want to treat an animal this way. So it's also illegal, as you can see. So don't use dog products on cats. And always follow labeled instructions. There's a reason people spent hours putting these words together in just such a way. It means something, and actually can mean that your money spent is used more effectively if we actually follow label instructions. There are a lot of on-animal products out there. Some of them are meant to be used on the animal. As you can see, there are a couple there that are meant to be taken internally. And it's important, again, to know why you're using the one that you're using. For instance, that one in the middle there, Capstar. This is an unusual product. It has a very specialized use. This is one, it's a pill. It's meant to be taken internally. When you give it to the dog swallows it, it gets into the stomach, it gets digested very rapidly, and as you can see the claim there, it begins working within 30 minutes. And they're not kidding. We worked with this product a while back, and it was pretty impressive. You give this pill, and within 30 minutes, dead fleas are falling off the dog. It takes a while to kill all of the fleas on the dog, but you can see dead ones coming off within 30 minutes. So that stuff's getting into the blood pretty quickly, and any fleas that are sucking that blood then get intoxicated and they die rapidly. However, this material clears out of the bloodstream within 36 hours. So any flea that hops on the dog after those 36 hours is home free, not affected in the least. There is no residual activity whatsoever. So you say, well, okay, I could just give my dog a pill every day and that'd be fine. My dog doesn't mind taking pills. Well, the Capstar pills run about $4 or $5 a piece, so that could get expensive pretty quickly. So you say, well, why in the world would anybody use that product anyway? Well, I can think of a couple of situations. Okay, let's say you're going to go home next weekend for Mother's Day. You're going to take your dog Bo with you. Bo doesn't have fleas. You want to keep him free of fleas. Your mother's dog, Fifi, on the other hand, is loaded with fleas. Now, being a bad child, you haven't done anything about those fleas yet, but you're going to have to deal with the consequences. So Bo and Fifi are going to play together all Sunday afternoon, and then Sunday evening you're going to pack Bo back up in the pickup truck and haul back toward home, and you don't want Bo to be bringing any of Fifi's fleas with him. So when you leave your mother's house, you could give Bo one of these Capstar pills, and by the time you got home, there wouldn't be any live fleas on Bo, so you wouldn't have to worry about infesting your house. So there's situations like that where Capstar would be logical, but not in every situation, probably not for everyday use. Each one of these products has its advantages, but it also has drawbacks, and that's why it's important to know what you're using and why you're using it. Some products are good for some situations and not for others. The Seresto collar up there in the left-hand corner, I've used this on my dog, was very impressed. It's an expensive collar, runs about 60 or 70 bucks, but you get 8 months of flea and tick control with this collar. I was, again, quite impressed with the results. It really did work as claimed. It kept fleas off my dog. So this is something to consider. If you want both flea and tick control, I would recommend something like this, where you only have to use one product and you get efficacy against both. I didn't mention this, but fleas, of course, are not the same as ticks. Ticks, of course, have 8 legs, so they're arachnids, and they're very different, both physiologically and biologically and anatomically different from insects. So something that kills an insect will not necessarily kill a tick and vice versa. However, the Seresto collar is formulated to be effective against both fleas and ticks. But again, the user needs to be aware and educate themselves so that they can make the best choice for them and their pet. Anyway, this is just an illustration. It's certainly not all of the products, not even the main products, but just to give an idea that there are different formulations, different ways to use insecticides, and different ways to control fleas. I've already been through the Capstar, but that again is the one where the pill is given, and it works for about 36 hours, and then it's cleared out of the body. But again, to remind you, the flea must bite the dog to pick up this product, and that's true of a lot of the products that are given orally. If it's given internally, it gets in the bloodstream. The flea must bite the host to get the insecticide. So if you've got a flea allergic animal, you probably don't want to use these products because that necessitates the flea biting the animal and thereby producing flea allergy dermatitis reactions in the dog. So maybe a different type of product would be better in situations like that. Well, I'm always getting the question, usually late June, early July, flea numbers have built to tremendous numbers. They've been on the dog probably for 3 or 4 months, but we humans are good at ignoring somebody else's discomfort. When the fleas hop off the dog, however, and start getting on us, then we get concerned about the flea problem and we want an answer immediately. Well, as I illustrated, once the flea population has gotten established in the home, there's nothing we can do immediately to eradicate fleas. You can't spray enough insecticide to get rid of the fleas that are pupating down in the carpet. This is not backed by replicated science, but we have shown that if you use steam cleaning, you can actually kill most stages of fleas in the carpet. It will remove the eggs, it will remove the larvae, it will penetrate down through the carpet and get the temperature hot enough to kill the flea pupae inside the cocoons. And you can also, of course, kill the adults and remove them as well. So steam cleaning is one of the few things that I can recommend when you've got a severe flea infestation and you need immediate relief. So keep that in mind. Cleaning the carpet. Now, if you've got a situation where you've got a flea infestation in an area that's not carpeted, then you've got a whole nother problem, and it may be even more challenging to address. Again, knowing where the animal is spending a lot of time. You can clean your entire carpet, kill all the fleas in the carpet, but if the cat's spending time up in the bookshelf and there's an infestation of fleas in the bookshelf, then we're still going to have fleas. I do want to include insect growth regulators. These are important adjuncts to any adulticide that you use. Methoprene and pyroproxyfen are the main ones. Pyroproxyfen, of course, is known as Nylar, Nygard, various brand names. The only distinction I would make here is that methoprene, while a wonderful insecticide if used indoors, is not that effective outdoors. It is photolabile. That means it is broken down by exposure to ultraviolet radiation. In other words, it degrades. Well, that's what you want insecticides to do. You don't want them to last forever. That's why people hated DDT, because it would just sit there and not degrade. Precor methoprene does degrade upon exposure to sunlight. Nylar, on the other hand, is more resistant to photodegradation. So if you're treating outdoors, consider Nylar. If you're treating indoors, methoprene is probably the way to go. And I wanted to make this point that methoprene kills the embryo inside the eggshell. So the eggs over on the left side there were treated with methoprene. As you can see, they have killed the embryos inside the eggshell. The eggs are shriveled up and dead. The eggs on the right there were never treated with an insect growth regulator. They're healthy, happy. The little embryos are developing inside the eggs, and those will hatch into healthy, happy little flea larvae. So you get a lot of impact using insect growth regulators. Of course, they work slowly, but they're going to break the life cycle and interrupt reproduction of the fleas so that you don't have a sustained infestation, and that's what you want. Again, knowing where the animal spends its time, that's where the concentration of flea eggs and larvae are going to be. Yes, theoretically, you could eliminate a flea infestation just by vacuuming every day, vacuuming up those flea eggs before they hatch. Unfortunately, most of us are not that good at housekeeping and not that conscientious, so it probably in practicality will not be accomplished, but consider that as an option. Certainly, sanitation is an important component of any pest management plan. Applying insecticides, again, always read and follow the label instructions. Focus the applications on areas that are frequented by the host. While you're making the application, of course, follow the label, exclude people and animals. And notice there that ceramic cat is a ceramic cat. Yes, if I had thought ahead, I would have removed the image so that it didn't look like we were treating in the presence of a live animal, but that's not. That's just a figurine. So there are no living animals or people other than the applicator there. Of course, obviously, other than me taking the picture. But again, follow label instructions. Now, in addition to treating the animal and treating the house, how about outdoors? Yes, frequently we can have flea infestations outdoors, but they're in localized locations. Fleas cannot survive in sun-exposed areas, so don't waste your chemical spraying the yard. Fleas are only going to be in areas where there's moisture, or at least high humidity, and no sun exposure. And usually it's also where the air is very still because they cannot stand drying conditions. So if there's a lot of air movement through there, the humidity is going to drop, the eggs are going to desiccate, the larvae will desiccate. So that's not a proper place for fleas to be developing. Think about places like under the porch, under the deck, again, places that are shaded, the air is still, and there's a high relative humidity. That's the area where you need to be treating for fleas. And obviously, if it's the place where the animal spends a lot of time, if that's where the dog goes to take a nap in the middle of the afternoon, that's a very likely place for flea larvae to be developing. I didn't make this point, but cat fleas are not just found on dogs and cats. They're also found on a lot of wild animals, including opossums, raccoons, skunks, coyotes, bobcats, and so on. Just about any canid or any felid that's out there, wild animal, cat fleas are going to do just fine on it. So don't lure wild animals into your backyard. People like to put out food and see what shows up, especially those of us who have trail cams now, and it's just fascinating to see how many different types of wildlife come strolling through our backyards while we're in bed every night. But don't leave out pet food overnight because, again, that just brings the strays in. You don't want these wild animals spending time around your backyard. And fleas are not the worst of it. There's some nasty internal parasites that you can get from wildlife. So especially raccoons, even as cute as raccoons are, you really don't want them hanging out in your backyard. So raccoons and skunks. Yes, skunks also can be a great host for cat fleas. By the way, this is a dead one on the side of the road. We academics may not be too bright, but I know enough not to try to get a picture of a live skunk, so I took advantage of this one. And don't let wildlife or other animals like feral cats or dogs nest in the crawl space. Be able to seal up your crawl space. You really don't want things getting in there. They're leaving all sorts of other things, other ectoparasites, other internal parasites, and doing damage to the understory of your house. So don't let things get in the crawl space. Seal up the crawl space so critters can't come and go. Some of the worst stories we get are when people have let a wild animal get in there and have litter early in the spring. Used to have a lab, worked with these people every spring. They had a crawl space underneath their laboratory, and they had a cute little family of skunks, and every spring the mother skunk would go in there and she'd have a litter of babies. I don't know what you call it, a litter of skunks, but anyway, she would have a bunch of babies. The babies would get big enough to take out, and then the whole family would move out, but they would leave their fleas behind. The fleas, of course, being starving, very hungry, would crawl up through the understory of the house, up through the subflooring, get up through the plumbing fixtures, or however they'd get up into the living space of the lab, and all of a sudden the people working in the lab would be covered in fleas. And then I would get a call from them, what do we do about this? Well, if you'd called me a couple of months ago and we could have sealed the skunk out, we wouldn't have had this problem to begin with. But every year it was the same story over again. We don't want wildlife living under our houses. I don't think I have to tell you this, but don't believe everything you read on the internet. There are people that still claim that brewer's yeast is effective against fleas, that feeding your dog garlic will protect the dog against fleas. This is not true. Neither garlic nor yeast has any impact on fleas whatsoever. If you want to feed it to your dog or cat, that's fine. Although I would warn about garlic. Garlic can actually produce a type of anemia in animals, so be careful about using garlic in dogs and cats. But anyway, it has no effect on fleas. Just to make this point, I think you already know this, but fleas are small. Most of them are less than 3 millimeters long. They have strong jumping legs. Yes, they do jump. There are no winged fleas. However, on my final exam, I still got a bunch of people telling me that there are a few fleas out there that can have wings. But no, there are no fleas that have wings. And they feed, as we said, only on blood. They cannot feed on anything else. The adult flea must have blood. People ask me about trapping out fleas. There are flea traps out there. You can buy them. They will give you a good idea of what types of fleas you have, maybe how many fleas there are in the area, but you're never going to trap out fleas. Trust me, every flea out there would much rather be on you or your pet than in a flea trap. But this may be a good strategy to use in determining how many fleas there are out there and what you can do, and what you can do about looking for where they are concentrated. Like if you put traps throughout the house, you'll find out there are probably more fleas in the bedroom than there are in the kitchen, that sort of thing, but you probably knew that. However, if you trap the fleas, you can then determine whether or not they're actually fleas. Do remember that not everything that's small and jumps is a flea. We frequently get springtails submitted as fleas, and that's why I still insist that if somebody has fleas, they've got to show me their flea before I start making recommendations about what to do about it. Obviously, if they have springtails, all they've got to do is turn on the fan, dry out the area, lower the humidity, and the poor little springtails will be dead in a couple hours. If it's a flea, that's not going to work. But again, I want to know whether we're dealing with fleas or if we're dealing with springtails. There are several good websites where you can identify fleas if you're so interested. The CDC has an excellent website with pictorial keys for flea identification. You probably will need a microscope because, again, fleas are pretty small. Of course, you can always send them to your extension service and get the specialists there to identify them for you. And you know me, I've got to make this point. Make sure you know what you're treating for. Just because your client tells you it's a flea does not mean it's really fleas. Many situations where someone will tell me they've got fleas, turns out the owner is actually suffering from Ekbom syndrome, which you probably have heard of as delusory parasitosis. And in that case, nothing we treat with is going to solve the problem. It's not that the dog has fleas, it's that the owner is dealing with this delusory condition. So I think you already know that, but make sure you know what the real story is before you go in with guns blazing. If you want to know more information on flea control products, there's a website put together by a group of us called VetPestX. It's a searchable database. You can go there, there's the website, but just Google VetPestX. I know, terrible name, but VetPestX has a list of all the different ectoparasites that affect animals. And this is not just dogs and cats, but includes horses and pigs and chickens and all of the rest. But you can go in there, you can specify dogs, you can specify whether you want to use a dust or a spot on or a spray. So you can actually tailor your response, tailor the product that you want to use based on your preferences for the product. Now, here in Georgia, every year we put together the Georgia Pest Management Handbook, and we have a list in there of host-applied flea control products if you're interested. But those I can only stipulate are the ones that are legal for use in the state of Georgia. If you want to read more about fleas, as Evan said, I put together a chapter for the Public Health Significance of Urban Pest, which was published by the World Health Organization. It's available for free online. And if you have a copy of the 10th edition of Malice, you can look at the chapter Ectoparasites, Fleas, and Lice and read more than anyone would ever want to know about fleas. All right, that's more than you wanted to know about fleas right there. Anybody got any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Hinkle. We've had some great questions and discussion in the chat box. If anyone has any questions that they want to put in the Q&A box for Dr. Hinkle to answer live, go ahead and do that. Right now, we don't have any questions yet. We'll put up a poll shortly, so make sure you answer the poll. Do fleas carry any diseases?
Fortunately, cat fleas are not a major vector. They do serve as the intermediate host of dog tapeworms, but fortunately dog tapeworms are something that only dogs and cats get, so we humans don't really have to worry about that. But interestingly, the way you get dog tapeworm is by swallowing the flea. It's not by the flea biting you, it's by you biting the flea. So yes, if you or your child consumes a flea that has a tapeworm in it, you can get dog tapeworm that way. Don't think many people run around eating fleas. You may find a toddler or two out there that's eating fleas, so it could happen, but this is a pretty rare occurrence. So in general, we say that cat fleas are not really a concern for public health.
Does a lot of cold weather kill any amount of fleas?
Probably not much. They will kill the larvae because the larvae are out there, they're vulnerable. But in general, the adult fleas are going to be on host, and as long as the host is comfortable, the little fleas are doing just fine.
Do fleas have a preference? Do they prefer dogs over cats or over humans?
They prefer dogs and cats over humans, but I don't think they really care whether it's a dog or a cat. But they like the dogs and the cats much better than they do humans. If they are desperate for blood, they'll come to us humans, but only if they're desperate.
All right, last call for questions. Looks like your talk was so informative that we don't have many questions.
One more point, Evan, if I could make another addition here. I meant to mention this. Cat fleas cannot live on human blood. Yes, they will bite us, they will suck our blood, but they cannot reproduce on human blood. So if you don't have a pet and there are no animals, there's nothing under the house, there's nothing that a flea can get to except a human, the population will die out. I know that's a hard way to go about controlling the population, but people ask that frequently. Well, there's only me and my husband living in the house. How long can these fleas last? Well, they are going to starve to death.
We've got one question. What if your fleas seem to be unkillable?
Well, there's always the two bricks, I guess. We do know that, yes, there are instances of insecticide resistance. That's when I would recommend going to the pest WebEx and see if you can find a product that you haven't used and maybe consider using one with a different mode of action.
Do flea collars require the fleas to have to walk across the collar?
That's why I didn't mention any flea collar other than the Seresto collar. As far as I can tell, just about every other flea collar is pretty worthless. Oops, I didn't say that out loud, did I? I would not recommend any of the over-the-counter flea collars. Most of them are really not very effective against fleas.
Can you comment on the efficacy of Revolution?
In general, Revolution has worked quite well. People who've used it have been pleased with it.
And then we got another question. Do they really last 30 days? Maybe they're talking about the drops. I'm not sure.
Oh, the drops. Generally, yes, if the product is used correctly. Most of the failures that we have seen, if we ask the pet owner, did you wash the dog before you use this product? They will say yes, and we'll say, well, don't do that. Really, if the pet owner will not wash the animal for a couple of weeks before using the product, they'll be much more pleased with the results. And generally, we get a month or more residual effectiveness of these products.
All right, it looks like our questions are winding down. So thank you so much for the informative talk today. I learned a lot about fleas myself.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone attending, and you know where to find me if you have further questions.
Thank you guys so much. We'll see y'all next month.
Thank you, Evan. I really appreciate your moderating. Thanks for doing such a great job.
Oh, no problem. You're welcome. See everyone next month. I believe it is on June 1st, and it will be on attracting pollinators to our yards. So check in next month.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, guys. Y'all have a great weekend.